The cold metal floor echoed with each step of Captain Jae-sung Park's worn work boots. His hands, once steady on military-grade weapons, now gripped a maintenance toolkit as he walked through the dimly lit corridors of Starbase Omega-9. At 65, he was just another aging worker in the vast machinery of the Galactic trading network. Outside the station's transparent walls, stars flickered against the infinite darkness of space. Jae-sung remembered a time when those same stars had been his battlefield, when humanity was feared and respected across the galaxy. Now those memories were nothing more than fading whispers. The interstellar trading station hummed with activity. Alien species from 100 different worlds moved about their business, their exotic languages creating a constant background buzz. Holographic displays flickered with trade routes, cargo manifests, and galactic news feeds. Most ignored the aging human maintenance worker as he went about his daily routine. Jae-sung's current job was far from his past as a special operations captain. He fixed cooling systems, repaired communication arrays, and ensured the station's basic infrastructure remained functional. It was honest work, but a far cry from the critical missions he once led during humanity's most challenging conflicts. As he approached the station's central maintenance hub, a group of young Keldoran diplomats caught his attention. They stood near a large viewing window, their iridescent skin reflecting the starlight. Unlike most species, Keldorans were tall and slender, with elongated limbs and intricate neural patterns visible beneath their translucent skin. "Can you believe humans used to think they were a galactic power?" One of the younger Keldorans laughed. His translator rendered the words clearly, intentionally loud enough for Jae-sung to hear. "Primitive beings. They're barely more than maintenance workers and cargo handlers now." Another diplomat joined in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Imagine thinking humans could compete in modern galactic politics. They're relics of a forgotten age. Look at them now, cleaning stations, piloting transport ships, doing menial labor across the galaxy." Jae-sung continued his work, his weathered hands moving efficiently across the maintenance panel. Years of military training had taught him patience. He'd heard worse insults during his active service. The scars on his body told stories of battles these young diplomats could never understand. The station's main computer system required a delicate touch. Each connection, each calibration was a small battle, one Jae-sung was determined to win. His fingers moved with a precision that spoke of decades of technical training and combat experience. Behind him, the Keldoran diplomats continued their conversation, unaware of the depth of experience standing just meters away. They saw an old human worker. They did not see a veteran who had survived multiple interstellar conflicts, who had developed strategies that had saved entire colonial systems. Jae-sung's mind drifted to his old unit. Scattered across the galaxy, most veterans like him had integrated into civilian life. They worked as engineers, technicians, traders, and administrators. To the current galactic powers, they were invisible, but they had not forgotten their training. They had not forgotten who they were. As the maintenance panel beeped with successful recalibration, Jae-sung allowed himself a slight smile. The young Keldorans might mock humans, but they had no idea of the skills and knowledge that lay dormant within these so-called relics. The stars outside continued their silent watch. Something was coming, and the forgotten veterans would be ready. The digital map of the galaxy glowed with an ominous red light. Hyun Ki-kim leaned closer to the screen, his fingers tracing the expanding border of Keldoran influence. At 58, he was still sharp, a retired military intelligence analyst who could never truly leave his old profession behind. His small apartment on the edge of New Seoul Colony was more of a command center than a living space. Screens covered every wall, each displaying different layers of galactic political information. Star charts, diplomatic communications, and military movement trackers created a complex web of data that only someone with his background could fully understand. The Keldoran hegemony was making its move. Their expansion was no longer subtle. Entire star systems were being marked for diplomatic integration. a term that everyone knew meant complete military occupation. The independent systems along the galactic rim were about to become targets. Hyun-Ki's communication device chirped. It was an encrypted message from an old contact, a network of human veterans spread across different sectors. Most people saw them as retired workers, scattered and forgotten. But they were something more. They were a hidden network of skills, memories, and unbroken connections. The message was simple, but carried deep meaning. Pattern Delta confirmed. Invasion imminent. He thought back to his military days. The current galactic defense forces were nothing more than a joke. Politicians and bureaucrats from various alien species had grown soft. They believed advanced technology could solve every problem. They had forgotten the most important lesson of warfare. Experience matters more than equipment. The Keldoran strategy was becoming clear. They would strike multiple systems simultaneously, overwhelming local defenses with superior numbers and technology. Their goal was not just territory, it was complete dominance. They wanted to prove their technological superiority by crushing any resistance quickly. Hyun-Ki reached out to Jae-sung Park. They had served together decades ago, and their connection remained strong. Communication between veterans was never just about words. It was about understanding, about a shared history that transcended current political boundaries. "We need to prepare," Hyun-Ki muttered to himself, typing a complex message that would be invisible to standard communication monitoring systems. The galactic news networks continued their usual programming. Reports about trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic meetings played in the background. No one seemed to notice the storm gathering at the edges of known space. But the veterans noticed. They had seen this before. They knew the signs of an impending conflict. Hyun-Ki began compiling a detailed report. His fingers moved across holographic interfaces, pulling together fragments of intelligence from dozens of sources. Each piece of information was carefully analyzed, cross-referenced, and mapped. The Keldoran invasion plan was ambitious. They would strike at least 12 independent star systems within the next solar month. These systems had minimal defensive capabilities. Most were small colonies or trading outposts, unable to mount a serious resistance against a full Keldoran assault. What the Keldorans did not know was that these systems were not as defenseless as they appeared. Scattered among the civilian populations were veterans like Jae-sung, experienced soldiers who had integrated into local communities, maintaining their skills and networks. Hyun-Ki's communication device blinked with a confirmation. The veteran network was activating. Slowly, carefully, they would begin to prepare their response. The galaxy might see humans as forgotten, but forgotten did not mean defeated. Something was coming, and this time, humanity would be ready. The communication network came alive with a series of carefully coded messages. To an outside observer, they would appear as routine maintenance reports, shipping logistics, and standard administrative communications. But to those who knew the code, they were something entirely different. Jae-sung Park began reaching out to his veteran contacts. They were everywhere now, integrated into the fabric of galactic society in ways no one truly understood. Some worked as maintenance technicians like himself. Others were transport pilots, communication specialists, trading station managers, and colony administrators. Dong-Woo Lee answered first. Once a combat engineer, he now managed a critical repair facility on a remote mining colony. His hands, which had once diffused complex battlefield explosives, now guided robotic repair units with the same precision. When Jae-sung's message came through, Dong-Woo understood immediately. "I've been tracking their movement." Dong-Woo's encrypted message read, "The supply lines are vulnerable, more vulnerable than they realize." Next was Sung-Min Choi, a former communication specialist who now managed a vast network of interstellar communication relays. His current job gave him access to information streams that most intelligence agencies would envy. He began quietly redirecting communication satellites, creating hidden channels that would be invisible to standard monitoring systems. Yoo Jin Park, no relation to Jae-sung, had become a logistics coordinator for a major trading consortium. Her strategic mind, which had once planned complex military operations, now orchestrated the movement of goods across multiple star systems. But her military training never left her. She saw patterns where others saw chaos. The Veterans Network was unlike any military organization. They had no official structure, no formal hierarchy. They were connected by shared experiences, by a deep understanding of conflict that went beyond simple military training. Each veteran brought something unique to the table. Dongwu understood infrastructure. Some men controlled communication channels. Yu Jin could move resources across vast distances, and Jae Sung had the ability to coordinate their efforts. They began to prepare, not as a traditional military unit, but as a fluid, adaptable network. They shared information through channels that would be impossible for the Keldoran hegemony to track. Old encryption methods, personal codes developed during past conflicts, and communication techniques that predated modern technology. The mining colony where Dongwu worked suddenly began upgrading its maintenance robots. Transport ships managed by veteran pilots started taking slightly different routes. Communication relays adjusted their standard protocols in ways that seemed random but were anything but. To the outside world, nothing appeared to be changing. The Keldoran hegemony continued to plan its invasion, believing their technological superiority would guarantee victory. They did not understand the network forming against them. These were not soldiers preparing for a traditional war. These were veterans who had learned to fight using every tool available. Their battlefield was not just physical space, but information, infrastructure, and strategic positioning. Hyun-Ki Kim continued to gather intelligence, sending coded updates through the veteran network. Each piece of information was carefully analyzed, cross-referenced, and distributed in ways that would not raise suspicion. The galaxy continued to spin. Trade routes remained active. Diplomatic channels remained open. But beneath the surface, something was changing. The forgotten veterans were remembering who they were, and they were preparing. The Keldoran hegemony had no idea what was coming. The Keldoran invasion fleet emerged from faster-than-light space like a swarm of metallic predators. Hundreds of sleek warships approached the neutral star systems, their weapons charged and ready. Galactic defense monitors recorded the approach with a sense of inevitable defeat. Captain Yoon-ji Kim sat in the cockpit of her civilian transport ship, the Starlight Courier. From the outside, she looked like any other long-distance trader. Her ship appeared old, slightly worn, nothing that would attract serious attention. But inside, the systems were anything but standard. The first wave of Keldoran ships began their assault on the Epsilon Rim colonies. These were small settlements, barely defended. Most had minimal protective systems. The Keldorans expected quick and total victory. Yoon-ji's communication system lit up with encrypted messages. These were not standard distress signals. These were coded communications from the veteran network, a system developed during humanity's past conflicts. Each message contained layers of information that looked like simple cargo manifests to anyone not knowing the code. Her hands moved across the ship's control panel with practiced efficiency. Years of military pilot training remained sharp beneath her civilian exterior. Where most saw a transport captain, she was something more, a carefully prepared first responder. The Keldoran ships began their standard invasion protocol. They would first disable communication systems, then begin ground assault. It was a strategy that had worked perfectly in dozens of previous conquests. They expected no real resistance. But resistance was exactly what they would get. Yoon-ji's ship began to move. To standard tracking systems, her movements appeared random, a civilian transport adjusting its cargo route. But each movement was carefully calculated. She was positioning herself to disrupt Keldoran communication networks. Her first action was subtle. Using communication systems she had modified during her years as a military pilot, she began sending out specific signal disruptions. These were not attacks. They were more like electronic whispers that would confuse Keldoran tracking systems. The veteran network was watching. Dongwu's modified maintenance robots on nearby colonies began moving in patterns that seemed random but were anything but. Sung Min's communication relays started sending out signals that would look like standard background noise to most systems. Keldoran commanders watched their invasion screens with growing confusion. Something was not right. Their targeting systems began to show inconsistent data. Communication between their ships started to become slightly delayed. Yunji allowed herself a small smile. The first phase of resistance had begun. The Keldorans had made a critical mistake. They believed technology could replace experience. They thought superior weapons meant guaranteed victory. They did not understand that human veterans had spent decades learning how to fight in ways that went beyond simple military hardware. Each veteran in the network was now a weapon. Not a traditional weapon, but something more dangerous. They were adaptive. They were patient. They had learned from multiple conflicts across different star systems. The invasion was underway, but the Keldorans were about to learn that humans were far from defeated. Something was happening in the Epsilon Rim, and it was not what the Keldoran hegemony had planned. The Veterans Network was more than a communication system. It was a carefully designed web of technology and strategy that had been years in the making. Each veteran had been slowly preparing, modifying systems, and creating a network that would be invisible to standard galactic monitoring. Hyun-Ki Kim sat in his command center, fingers moving across holographic displays. Behind him, screens showed multiple star systems, each with intricate layers of information that only he could fully understand. What looked like random data streams were actually a complex communication system. Dongmu Li's contribution was perhaps the most impressive. During his years as a combat engineer, he had learned to modify technology in ways most engineers could not imagine. The maintenance robots he managed were not just simple repair units. They were now sophisticated tools of resistance. On the mining colony where Dongmu worked, these robots began to move with a purpose. To anyone watching, they appeared to be performing standard maintenance, but each movement was carefully calculated. They were repositioning communication relays, creating hidden networks that would be impossible for the Keldoran hegemony to detect. Sung Min Choi's work with communication systems was equally strategic. He had spent years building a communication network that looked like standard interstellar traffic. But beneath the surface, it was something much more powerful. Each communication channel could be instantly reconfigured, redirected, or used to send complex coded messages. The first signs of their capabilities became clear when Keldoran invasion ships started experiencing strange technical difficulties. Navigation systems would momentarily glitch. Communication channels would show brief, unexplainable interruptions. To most observers, these seemed like minor technical issues, but they were anything but minor. Hyun-Ki's screens showed the precise impact of their strategy. Each technical disruption was carefully measured, each communication channel subtly altered. The veterans were not trying to destroy Keldoran technology. They were trying to confuse it, to make it unreliable. Yoo-Jin Park's logistics expertise came into play next. She began redirecting supply routes, creating false communications that would make Keldoran military planners question their invasion strategy. What looked like simple trade route adjustments were actually carefully designed misinformation campaigns. The Keldoran hegemony had believed human technology was outdated. They did not understand that these veterans had been adapting, learning, and preparing for years. Their technology was not about having the most advanced equipment. It was about understanding how to use existing systems in ways no one expected. Jae-Sung Park's maintenance skills proved crucial. The systems he had learned to repair became tools of resistance. He could find weak points in communication networks that most technicians would never notice. Each repair became a potential point of strategic advantage. As the invasion continued, the veterans' network began to show its true power. It was not a traditional military response. It was something more fluid, more adaptive. They were fighting a war of information, of subtle manipulation, of strategic positioning. The Keldoran commanders began to realize something was wrong. Their invasion was not going as planned. Systems that should work perfectly were becoming unreliable. Communication channels were becoming difficult to trust. They did not yet know the full extent of what was happening, but they were about to learn that human veterans were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The hidden capabilities were just beginning to show themselves. Sung Min Choi understood communication better than most. His fingers moved across specialized communication panels, creating a network of disruption that would make the Keldoran invasion forces question everything they knew about warfare. The veteran strategy was not about direct confrontation. It was about creating uncertainty. They would make the Keldoran military doubt its own systems, its own intelligence, its own capabilities. On 3 different star systems, carefully placed communication relays began to send out complex signal patterns. To the Keldoran tracking systems, these appeared to be standard background noise. But each signal was a carefully crafted piece of electronic warfare. Jae-sung Park coordinated from his maintenance station. Years of military experience had taught him that true warfare was about information, not just weapons. He understood how systems connected, how one small change could create massive disruptions. The first major strike came unexpected. Keldoran supply lines suddenly found themselves facing inexplicable routing problems. Cargo ships would receive conflicting navigation instructions. Communication channels would momentarily drop, then return with strange interference. Dongmu Lee's modified maintenance robots played a crucial role. They were not simple repair units anymore. Each robot was now a potential point of electronic disruption. They moved through critical infrastructure, creating subtle changes that would cascade through Keldoran systems. Yoo-jin Park's logistical expertise became their strategic backbone. She could see the entire battlefield in a way most military commanders could not. Each movement, each communication was part of a larger plan. She was not just moving resources. She was creating a complex chess game where the Keldorans did not even know they were playing. The Keldoran military command began to panic. Their invasion was falling apart, but not through traditional resistance. Their systems were becoming unreliable. Navigation became difficult. Communication channels became filled with noise and confusion. What the Keldorans did not understand was that these veterans had spent decades learning how to fight. Not with massive weapons, but with intelligence, with understanding of how complex systems worked, with patience and creativity. Eun-ji Kim's transport ships began to play a critical role. They appeared to be standard civilian vessels. But each ship was now a potential electronic warfare platform. They would move through invasion zones, sending out carefully designed signal disruptions. The veterans were fighting a war of information. Each communication channel was a potential weapon. Each system modification was a strategic move. They were not trying to destroy the Keldoran technology. They were trying to make it completely unreliable. Hyun-ki Kim watched the entire operation from his command center. His intelligence background allowed him to see the bigger picture. Each small disruption was part of a larger strategy. They were creating a fog of uncertainty that would make the Keldoran invasion impossible. The Keldoran military leadership began to realize something was seriously wrong. Their invasion was not going as planned. Systems that should work perfectly were becoming unpredictable. Communication channels were becoming difficult to trust. They did not yet understand the full extent of what was happening, but they were about to learn that human veterans were far more dangerous than simple soldiers with weapons. The tactical brilliance of the old guard was just beginning to show itself. The Keldoran invasion fleet began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. Their advanced technology became a weakness instead of a strength. Each system designed for perfect control now worked against them. Yoo-jin Park watched the strategic map with calculated precision. Her fingers traced the complex patterns of the veteran network's resistance. What looked like random disruptions were actually a carefully constructed plan that had been years in preparation. The first major breakthrough came in the Epsilon Rim system. Keldoran warships found their navigation systems compromised. Communication channels became unreliable. Supply lines collapsed without any direct military intervention. It was warfare fought through information, not traditional weapons. Hyun-ki Kim coordinated from his hidden command center. Every veteran understood their role perfectly. They were not a traditional military unit. They were a network of experienced professionals who knew exactly how to exploit systemic weaknesses. Dongwu Li's maintenance robots continued their silent work. To an outside observer, they appeared to be performing routine repairs. In reality, they were systematically undermining the Keldoran invasion infrastructure. Each robot was a precision tool of disruption. The Galactic community watched in disbelief. The Keldoran hegemony, long considered the most technologically advanced military force, was being defeated by what appeared to be scattered human workers. No massive weapons were used. No direct confrontations occurred. Eun-ji Kim's transport ships played a critical role. They moved through invasion zones, creating electronic interference that confused Keldoran tracking systems. What looked like simple civilian vessels were actually sophisticated electronic warfare platforms. Sung Nin Choi's communication network became the nervous system of the veteran resistance. He could redirect, interfere, and manipulate communication channels in ways the Keldorans could not understand. Each signal was a weapon more precise than any physical missile. The Keldoran military commanders began to panic. Their invasion plans, which had worked perfectly in dozens of previous conflicts, were falling apart. Their technology, which they had believed was unbeatable, was now working against them. Jae-sung Park understood the true nature of their resistance. This was not about defeating the Keldorans through traditional military might. This was about showing the galaxy that experience, adaptability, and understanding of complex systems were more powerful than advanced technology. Each veteran brought a unique skill to the network. Logistics experts, communication specialists, maintenance technicians, they were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were problem solvers who had learned to fight using intelligence and creativity. The turning point came quickly. The Keldoran invasion went from a seemingly unstoppable force to a collapsing system within weeks. Their supply lines became impossible to maintain. Communication between their ships became increasingly difficult. Navigation systems became unreliable. Galactic news networks began to report on the unexpected resistance. Commentators struggled to explain how a group of seemingly ordinary human workers could disrupt such an advanced invasion force. The Keldoran leadership could not comprehend what was happening. Their military doctrine, built on technological superiority, was being dismantled by an enemy that did not fight according to any standard rules of engagement. Humans were no longer seen as a forgotten species. They were becoming something else entirely, a force that understood that true power came from adaptability, experience, and collective intelligence. The veterans had turned the tide, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The final confrontation was not what anyone expected. No massive space battles occurred. No traditional weapons were fired. Instead, the veterans delivered a defeat more complete than any military conquest. Jae-sung Park stood before the Galactic Confederation Council, representing the Human Veteran Network. The chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of different species. Most had watched the Keldoran invasion attempt collapse in ways they could not understand. "We are not a military force," Jae-sung explained, his voice calm and steady. "We are problem solvers. We are people who understand that true power comes from adaptability, experience, and collective intelligence." The Keldoran representatives sat in shock. Their invasion had not just failed, it had been systematically dismantled without a single traditional military engagement. Their technological superiority had become their greatest weakness. Hyun-ki Kim presented the detailed analysis of their resistance. Each action, each communication disruption was carefully documented. The veterans had created a resistance network that worked like a complex, living system. No single point of failure existed. No central command could be targeted. Dongwu Li demonstrated how their modified maintenance robots had created systematic disruptions. These were not weapons of destruction. They were tools of precision interference. Each robot had become a point of strategic advantage. Eun-ji Kim explained their communication strategies. The transport ships were not just vessels. They were mobile electronic warfare platforms that could adapt and respond in real time. Their civilian appearance had been their greatest strength. The Galactic Confederation Council listened in stunned silence. What they heard was not a military report. It was a lesson in strategic thinking, in understanding complex systems, in the power of collective experience. Sung Min Choi detailed their communication network. What looked like random signal patterns were actually a sophisticated method of information warfare. They had created a resistance that could not be easily tracked or stopped. Yu Jin Park presented the logistical analysis. Their resistance had not just stopped the Keldaran invasion. They had exposed fundamental weaknesses in the hegemony's military doctrine. No technological advantage could replace human adaptability and collective intelligence. The veterans were not seeking glory. They were demonstrating a fundamental truth about warfare, about survival, about intelligence itself. Technology was a tool. Experience was the real weapon. Representatives from multiple species began to understand. These human veterans were not a forgotten workforce. They were a powerful network of problem solvers who could adapt to any challenge. The Keldaran hegemony was forced to withdraw from all planned invasion territories. Their military reputation was completely destroyed. They had entered the conflict believing in their technological superiority. They left understanding that true power was about more than advanced equipment. Jae Sung's final statement resonated through the council chamber. We are not defined by our past. We are defined by our ability to adapt, to learn, to solve problems collectively. The galactic community would never look at humans the same way again. They were no longer seen as a declining species. They were recognized as a force of strategic thinkers, of problem solvers who could face any challenge. The veterans had not just stopped an invasion. They had changed the way the galaxy understood power, intelligence, and collective action. Something fundamental had shifted, and humanity had found its place among the stars.